What's up? It's Cashew. I'm part of a casual Genshin server, and a couple people were having a discussion I think is really worth weighing in on. Not just for Genshin, but for games in general. So this is not a Genshin Impact video, though the discussion was originated because of a conversation about it. The conversation was based on the question, is Genshin a skill-based game? And I think this actually has a lot to do with how we define skill in games, how important it is to players, and how to look for things that developers are doing that may show us skill that we're really excited about or skill that we don't like. This comes up a lot in League of Legends design, um, and so that's where I'm going to move first. So, League of Legends is a very skill-based game. I don't think there's anybody that would dispute that. League is skill-based in a knowledge perspective. It is skill-based from your ability to hit buttons correctly, your ability to pay attention, notice patterns, and, like, analyze game states. All of it is very skill-based. And most competitive games, PvP competitive games, are the exact same. Dota and shooters and StarCraft and fighting games, obviously the types of skills that you have vary, but these games are very skill-intensive. Anything real-time, player versus player, is by nature skill intensive. Um, what League is doing often right now is taking things that are in the game that have a mechanic and either simplifying or removing them. So, simplifying the type of power you get or streamlining the type of power you get from certain objectives. Streamlining the way that like some minion waves work or having them scale more naturally, putting more power into your champion and less power into your items. All of these things are things that kind of reduce skill expression. And it's not a negative. Reducing skill expression is not an inherent negative in this game. The reason is because when you are expressing your skill, you are also mentally taxing yourself. You have to do something consciously to express that skill. And if you are asked to express too much skill too often, depends entirely on the person. There is a breakpoint where the game is no longer fun and is instead work. And it is important to have that line between fun and work, and know where your game sits, where the population of your game sits, and how to add things that are interesting without moving that line or going over that line. I think sometimes League of Legends goes over that line. On release, Aurora was a character that rewarded skill a little more, and now she rewards skill a little less. This is one specific example. They added range to her abilities to make her it's easier for her to hit skill shots, to land skill shots, and she's less polarizing, less punishing if champions outrange her, because they're less likely to. In return, some of her extended trades and her ability to punish melee characters that can't get onto her easily, has been lowered. So, that is a type of skill expression being removed. Now, that is done by the designers because they are aware of specific types of skill expression that people care about, right? They're aware of these micro points of skill expression that may be really frustrating to a large portion of League of Legends player base. And this is the first thing that I really want to define, is how much skill matters to a player base. League of Legends player base wants a pretty high level of skill, but the execution requirement for League of Legends is much lower than the execution requirement of a game like Tekken or StarCraft. Completely different games, right? Guns the Duel and Melee and other games also exist at this massively high mechanical skill requirement. So mechanical skill is a lever that developers pull constantly. They move it up and down and change it around, and obviously it's a grid or a graph or, it's more complicated than a single lever, but it's one lever. So mechanical skill. Going back to our original question, does Genshin have mechanical skill? Yes, but. So when I say these things, I'm not answering the question, but I'm defining parts of the question. Mechanical skill exists in Genshin. Dashing to gain iframes to dodge things, using your burst to gain iframes to dodge things, are both reaction-based forms of defensive mechanics, and reaction-based mechanics are skill expression. The more accurate you are in your reaction timings, the better you're aware of these iframes, the more things you can dodge, right? The less safety you need, the more time you can be doing damage, the better your movement is. These are optimizations that increase your effectiveness. Let's go to another type of skill expression completely. So, let's talk about Path of Exile. Totally different game. You do not have to play Path to understand the argument I'm about to make. Path of Exile is a very complicated game, and it is a very difficult game, and I think that is probably something few people would argue. A lot of the difficulty of Path comes from building a character in a way that you can interact with the content you want to interact with. Very often, if you are first timing Path and you do not have a guide, you will hit the wall. And people talk about the wall, but it's not a single wall. It's very vague, and it depends on what you're doing and how effective your character is, how good you are at other ARPGs. Most people will find a wall on their first non-guided character. Path of Exile has tons of problems and tons of solutions. Those solutions are entirely knowledge-based. I've been telling people, I think Path is almost an auto-battler. You spend hours setting up a machine, your character, and then you go into maps and you hit single buttons or a couple buttons, and your character's immortal and blows up whatever area you're in. But the part of the game where you strategize exactly what things you need to be able to answer, like, am I doing things where I need to be bleed immune? Am I doing things where I need cold resistance? Well, if I'm fighting the Searing Exarch, I kind of don't, right? If I'm bossing, I don't need these things. Do I do enough damage to ignore some types of defensive layers? I play a very aggressive character in Path of Exile. I play a Kinetic Blast Wander, covers the entire screen in projectiles, so I don't need nearly as many defensive layers, because one of my best defensive layers is kill everything on the screen as much as possible. And, like, yeah, it doesn't always work, but it's effective. And these are all knowledge-based. But Path of Exile is called hard, it's called difficult, it's called complicated. I think that these things represent a form of skill. They are an understanding of the game, but they are considered a difficulty. You have to overcome this difficulty. And so I think it's fair to say that this knowledge is a skill. I think you are good at Path of Exile if you are good at making builds in Path of Exile. All that requires is knowledge, but to make any build in Path of Exile as effective as possible requires such an intricate knowledge of all of the tools you have available and how they best interact that I think it would be unfair to call it anything but skill. You are good at math if you spend years doing, like, taking advanced math courses and have a natural talent. In the same way, if you spend years picking apart Path of Exile builds or any video game and figuring out what makes it tick, you are good at that game. I'm going to follow into Genshin here. Genshin obviously is drastically easier to understand, build, theorycraft than Path of Exile is, but it does still ask you to do that. You have to know the optimal ways to play your characters. You have to know the best ways they interact. To play Genshin optimally, you have to understand elemental mastery and internal cooldowns. You don't necessarily have to understand elemental gauge theory, but it all exists, right? And you need to understand energy recharge, energy particles. These things, to play Genshin optimally, not well, but optimally, are knowledge, but could be considered skill. I know these things, and most casual Genshin players don't, and I have heard people refer to me as good at the game because I understand these things. Now, is everyone going to define it that way? No, but, so, second thing, there is arguably skill in Genshin's knowledge gaining. Now, it's not complex. You can do it relatively easily, but it's there. Third thing, RNG. And a fourth thing we're going to talk about at the same time, difficulty choice. Both of these things are going to come from another game type. So we talked about League, a player versus player MOBA, Path of Exile, a player versus enemy ARPG. We're going to talk about another player versus player game, Yu-Gi-Oh! Now, this argument applies to any card game at all. And if you hear these arguments and you've played any card game, you're probably going to understand why very quickly. But I'm going to use Yu-Gi-Oh! Because I'm most familiar with it currently. So, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a card game, and it has randomness in it by nature. You are more likely to win if you draw better than your opponent. This is objectively true. There are different levels of power of the different cards, and they interact in different ways. Additionally, Yu-Gi-Oh! Has a meta, and it is a player versus player game. As a result, you are more likely to win games if you build your deck in such a way that it beats the meta. Example, the TCG, the paper, Western format of Yu-Gi-Oh! Has a deck that has been dominant for months called Ryziel. Ryziel is best answered by beating one card that it makes, one card it puts on its board called Ryziel Detonator. There are a number of cards that beat Ryziel Detonator, and as a result, if you play those cards, you're more likely to beat Ryziel, the most popular deck in the room. This makes you better at the game, because world champions do this. High-ranked players do this. This is a form of skill expression. It is knowledge-based, it is a choice you make, and you have an essentially infinite amount of time, weeks or months, to deck build around these concepts. All the data is there. You can look at tournament reports. but it's still something that is considered good, that good players do. In the same way, good players look at this meta and pick entire decks based around it. Recently, I don't remember what type of tournament, a regional, YCS, relatively high attendance, relatively high power tournament, was won by a player called Ding Kabui. Ding Kabui brought Fire King, and all you have to know is that that deck was not considered a contender for winning. It is not going to win these tournaments on paper. But it was really good against a couple specific things people were playing in the format, so it was winnable. And Dinkabui is one of the best players to ever play the game, and the reason he's known as that is for things like this. Bringing out decks that beat the meta. That is a skill. Analyzing the meta and understanding, not through spreadsheets or whatever, but understanding through card interactions, individual, intense gameplay experience, months and years of testing and being good, that certain things beat other things because of the nature of individual interactions being favorable. That is a skill. So, he is doing something that I think is relevant to this. He is setting his difficulty when he plays the game. If I go into a Yu-Gi-Oh! Tournament, and you don't have to know what this means, but I'm going to play Dark Magician. Dark Magician is not good. It is not a good competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck. I am making the game harder, and I am more likely to lose. If I play Ryzeal, which was the best deck before a recent ban list, I am far more likely to win, even if I am the exact same caliber player with months of experience on both decks. I am going to win more on Ryzeal. This is objective. So is that a form of skill expression? Maybe. Not really, but what it is it changes the amount of skill you need to succeed. So, if I want to win 5 of 10 rounds at a YCS and I bring Dark Magician, I'm going to have to play perfectly. No mistakes. My deck has to be perfect. The cards that I put in my deck have to be exactly what I need. I have to get lucky. I probably have to play against less meta decks. Tons of things need to go right. If I bring Ryzeal, I just have to play well. I have to play pretty well, and I have to bring an optimized list to beat other people who are doing the same thing. But the game gets significantly easier. And we're going to take both those concepts right into Genshin again. Genshin Impact has a large cast of characters with vastly varying power. So if I play the original characters in the game, Amber, or like Traveler, main Traveler from Animo or Geo from the 1.0 patch. These characters were released 5 years ago, and they're not good. And I compare those characters to characters like Neuvillette, Mualani, Mawika. These characters that have come out in the last couple years that are vastly overpowered compared to these original characters. There's not even a comparison to be drawn. If you are not familiar with gacha games and you're watching this video, hi, welcome. Also, you can typically expect Neuvillette, Mualani, whatever, to be doing between 5 and 15 times the damage that a similarly optimized Amber would do. And that means, as a result, the Amber player has to have a higher level of skill if they want to clear content. The Amber player has to do all of their rotations incredibly well. Genshin Impact does have rotations. You have to press buttons in specific orders to maximize your buffs, your reactions, deal more damage efficiently. Genshin Impact's content is also timed. That's the endgame push, is that you have to do content, not just kill enemies, but kill them within a specified amount of time. So doing more damage is required. You have to do a certain amount of damage at a bare minimum. You have to kill this enemy. You have to do, 1.2 million damage. That is so much harder on Amber. You have to put a lot more time in. You have to put practice in with your mechanics. You have to have good ping. If you have bad ping, you just can't do your rotations fast enough. You have to have a perfectly built team. You have to have optimized weapons and artifacts, and you have to know the enemies that you're playing against, understand their attack patterns, how to move them around the arena to be more advantageous. All of these things need to go into clearing with Amber. That is not required skill. You never have to do that, because you can get characters far more powerful than Amber, guaranteed, without randomness, without spending money. You can get more powerful characters and never touch Amber. But those characters are still less powerful than the ones you get on the banners, the premium characters, like Neuvillette, like Mawika. So, is that skill? I would argue absolutely. So, Genshin can be a skill-based game based on the difficulty you set. It can be a skill-based game based on the meta. How well do you know the enemies? It can be a skill-based game based on the knowledge. How well do you know what your characters are supposed to do? And it can be a skill-based game based on reactions. How do you dodge things? How do you play around things? How do you optimize your rotations? The only argument against Genshin being a skill-based game is pay to win. Genshin is very pay to win. If you spend a whole bunch of money on Genshin, you can do content at a trivial level. It is essentially autopilot. You can play just one character as opposed to a team of 4, which is standard. You can bring them into an area and clear it in the amount of time needed to get all of your Primogems. But if you are bad, you are not going to get that content, even with the exact same character, as efficiently, as fast as another player. So, then the next part of the skill argument is, does skill matter once you have achieved everything the game asks you to achieve? I think the answer is yes, because people never stop when a PvE game says you've done it. There's a whole field of speedrunning dedicated to breaking games well beyond the limits of what developers set. There are speedruns for Genshin's endgame content. Every time it resets, there are collections of videos that get released. This is my 20-second speedrun of the first side of this abyss, right? This stuff matters to people, and it means you're better. If you can clear with easier characters, if you can clear with better builds, if you can clear faster, if you understand enemies more, you are better at Genshin Impact. And I do think that means that Genshin is a skill-based game. If you spend money, does it trivialize the game? Yes. And the final thing, is Genshin an easy game? Almost objectively, yes. Genshin is significantly easier, and by easy what I mean is you can clear all content in the game, the entire story, all side quests, all bosses, the Spiral Abyss and the Imaginarium Theater, without spending money, without being good, without doing all of the theory crafting analysis, without drilling rotations. But there's a lot of skill involved in making it easier. If you get better, you will do quicker content. You can do it earlier, so like with your characters less ground up, less farmed, right? You can do it with less banner characters. You don't have to spend the same amount of money to get constellations or whatever. You don't have to do whole bunches of other things if you just get good. That's it. So I just want to reaffirm, I think Genshin is a skill-based game because the versions of skill that exist in other games that are specifically designed to be skill-based games, competitive card games, difficult player versus enemy games, and player versus player competitive games that are real-time, all have forms of skill that can be represented in Genshin. I do think that Genshin is an easy game. I do think that Genshin is a solvable game. It's very limited in the information and tools available to players, and I think that Genshin can be trivialized by spending money. So, nuanced take, but TLDR, yeah, it's a skill-based game. Now, if you've gotten this far and you're disagreeing with me, the reason is probably because you think that just because Genshin has skill represented, it does not mean that it is skill-based. The reason that I would disagree with you is because despite being able to clear all content without representing a significant amount of skill, just like I mentioned a moment ago with the speedrunning community, you are considered different tiers of good. If you can do Abyss, the final form of Genshin, in 90 seconds versus 60 versus 30. And somebody with the same characters, 2 accounts, same characters, can do the Abyss at vastly different speeds. I think it's very hard to make an argument that Genshin is not at all skill-based, but clearing all content in Genshin is not difficult. It is an easy game, but it is a skill-based game. If you disagree with any of that, let me know. This is something that's been on my mind since I first saw the discussion mentioned a day or two ago in that Discord I was talking about. If you're from that Discord, hey, what's up, guys? I have a receding hairline, and my bed's a mess. I'll catch y'all later.